So now that we've created our data model based off of both customer info and order info, and we've created the relationship between those two data sets, we can now report off of that data using a pivot table. So let's take a look at how we can create a pivot table based off of our newly modeled data model. All right, so I'm back inside the exercise file, same one I've been using. I'm going to go to the Power Pivot tab, and I'm going to open up my data model. I'm going to go to the Manage button. This just reopens up the same window that we experienced in the previous lecture when we were adding our data sets to the data model and creating the relationships. So I've got my two tabs down there, customer info and order info, and now I want to create the pivot table. So up here on my Home tab, top of my screen within Power Pivot, about halfway down, I've got my pivot table tool. So I'll give that a click, and I'm going to create a new pivot table. All right, so Excel kind of takes over from here. I'm moving away from the data model window or the Power Pivot window, and now I'm back inside of the Excel application. Looks a little bit different than what we experienced creating the standard pivot table, but first step, I'm going to tell it, hey, I'm going to put this into a new worksheet. I'll hit OK. I've got my new sheet down below. I'll go ahead and give that a double click just to rename this. Let's double click that sheet 7 or whatever number you got there. And I'll call this model pivot table, just so I recognize it. This is the one we're working with. So now looking over into our pivot table field list, I can see that I've got my two tables in there. I've got the customer info table with all the fields from that customer info section. And I've got my order info table in there as well with all the fields from that table. And they're related to one another. Let's just try creating a simple pivot table based off of these multiple sets of data through our data model. So let's say from the customer info table, I'd like to get their country. I'm just going to left click, drag that to the rows, and I've now got all the countries for all my various customers. All right. Now that's coming from the customer info table. Let's close that up. From the order table, I want to know, I want to do something about their freight. Let's get an average freight for these different countries. So I'll grab freight, drag that down to the value section. What do we get by default? This is a numeric value. Didn't average it, it summed it. Look at that, sum of freight. That's great. Now I've got total freight by country. Two different data sets, one from customers, one from orders. But because of the data model, we can combine them, create the relationships, and then report off of it. Now, you know what? I don't want sum of freight. Let's change that. So I'll give that a left click. Let's do value field settings, and I'll change that to an average. Let's find out our average cost for freight for these different countries for our different customers. So it's as simple as that. But a very powerful tool that we can grab data sets or lists, whether they're from Excel or from some other source, some other database, online services. We can create relationships between them, and now we can create our pivot tables. So try this out. Get your data model going, get your two sets of data in there, create the relationships, and then launch the pivot table tool from your Power Pivot window. Try it out.